Hello, everyone. Tonight, we plunge into a truth so profound, it might just shatter your understanding of power itself. We speak of faith, that elusive spark within us. But what if the world has sold us a lie about its true nature, its true size? What if the very measure you use to gauge its worth is fundamentally flawed, leading you astray from an astonishing, world-altering potential? Is your faith a mustard seed, or is it a giant, towering, formidable, an unshakable fortress? The answer, I promise you, will not only shock you, but could redefine your entire existence. Forget what you think you know, because the real power, the true might, often hides in the most unexpected places. This is not a lesson. It is an unfolding myth, an ancient whisper echoing through the corridors of time, calling to the restless spirit within you, not in some grand gilded hall of ancient kings, but in the quiet, desolate landscape of her own soul. Ilara walked amongst us, her eyes reflecting the endless gray of a perpetually overcast sky. She carried a burden heavier than any earthly chain, the weight of inadequacy, the gnawing whisper of not enough. Her life felt like a ceaseless uphill climb against an invisible, oppressive force. Every sunrise brought not hope, but a renewed encounter with what she perceived as her personal Goliath, a looming shadow, a giant of doubt and despair that mocked her every effort, her every flicker of belief. This giant was not made of flesh and bone, but of accumulated failures, of unspoken fears, of the world's crushing expectations. It stood astride her path, a colossal, unmoving entity, its very presence draining the color from her days, stealing the breath from her lungs. Its shadow stretched long and wide, enveloping her, making every step feel like treading through an abyss. It was the sum of every can't, every shouldn't, every never will, echoing in the hollow chambers of her heart. Ilara had heard the tales of the ancient parables, the wisdom passed down through generations. She knew of the mustard seed, how it was said to be the smallest of all seeds, yet capable of growing into the largest of garden plants, a tree where birds could nest. A metaphor for faith, they said, a tiny spark that could ignite a bonfire, but for Ilara it felt like a cruel irony. Her faith, she mused, was barely a speck, a microscopic dust particle lost in the vast, swirling tempest of her anxieties. How could such a minuscule thing, this fragile, almost invisible mustard seed of belief, ever hope to stand against the monolithic despair that was her giant? It felt like bringing a pebble to fell a mountain, a sigh to calm a raging storm. Her heart ached with the disparity, the overwhelming disproportion. She saw others, their faith seemingly robust, their conviction unwavering, like ancient oaks rooted deep in fertile soil. And she, a lone, withered blade of grass, bending under the slightest breeze, on the verge of snapping. The world, in its cruel wisdom, often equates size with strength, mass with might, and Ilara, caught in this snare, judged her spiritual self against this false metric, found herself wanting, and surrendered deeper into the giant's cold embrace. She yearned for a faith that was a weapon, a shield, a visible manifestation of power. Instead, she felt only the delicate, almost imperceptible pulse of a tiny seed, buried deep, unsure if it would ever sprout, let alone blossom into something grand enough to challenge her towering nemesis. The whisper of the giant was relentless. You are too small. Your faith is nothing. You will never be enough. And Ilara, in her darkest moments, found herself nodding, her spirit echoed. This was her reality, a ceaseless battle against a foe she perceived as infinitely stronger, armed with an arsenal she believed to be tragically inadequate. Every dawn brought the same internal lament, a silent scream against the perceived injustice of her minuscule spiritual endowment. The giant loomed, its shadow eclipsing even the faint hope of distant stars, its voice a constant, reverberating drumbeat of it was a prison built of perception, locked by the keys of self-doubt, reinforced by the world's superficial judgment of power and size. She craved escape, yearned for release. But the path forward was shrouded in an impenetrable fog, and her mustard seed felt too small to even light a flicker against the encroaching darkness. One evening, as twilight bled into the ink-black night, painting the world in shades of despair, Ilara found herself drawn to the oldest part of the city, a place where history was etched into every cobblestone, where ancient stories clung to the very air. She sought not answers, but distraction, a temporary reprieve from the relentless internal siege. Her steps led her to the forgotten archives, a sprawling labyrinth of scrolls and tomes, long abandoned by most, a relic of an age that valued silent contemplation over instant gratification. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams of moonlight, filtering through grimy windows, illuminating forgotten wisdom. Here, among the whispers of forgotten scribes and philosophers, she stumbled upon a collection of texts unlike any she had encountered. Not grand treatises on theology, nor epic sagas of warrior saints, but a series of cryptic parables, fragmented prophecies, and allegories written in a language that seemed to vibrate with a forgotten power. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but their essence was potent, pulling her into their enigmatic embrace. One scroll, in particular, caught her eye. Its title, barely legible, spoke of the gardener of celestial orchards and the seed of unseen power. It wasn't a story of heroes battling dragons, but of patience, growth, and the hidden mechanics of creation. It spoke of a time before time, when the grand architect crafted the very fabric of existence, not with colossal hammers and mighty chisels, but with the subtle touch of intention, the silent blossoming of potential. It detailed the birth of the first seeds, not as dormant husks, but as miniature universes, each containing the blueprint of a future forest, an entire ecosystem within its tiny. The gardener, it said, planted not with a focus on immediate size, but on the living essence, the inherent truth within each seed. The giant, the scroll subtly implied, was not of this true generative lineage. It was a construct, a monument built upon the absence of life, often confused for power because of its imposing scale. It had no roots, no internal drive for growth. It merely was fey, a static monument to a perceived victory or an entrenched fear. Alara read late into the night, the words seeping into her very bones. The scroll spoke of a secret covenant, a divine promise embedded in the smallest things. It detailed an ancient struggle not between physical titans, but between the dynamic, ever-expanding force of life, represented by the seed, and the static, ultimately decaying force of stagnation, epitomized by the giant. The giant in this context wasn't an evil entity, but often a manifestation of humanity's collective fear, its ingrained belief in scarcity, its misplaced trust in external show over internal. It was the sum of all the things we believe are too big to overcome, the problems we surrender to, the doubts we let calcify into unmoving mountains. It thrived on our awe, our fear, our conviction that it was unassailable because of its sheer, overwhelming presence. The giant builds its walls high, but its foundations are shallow. One passage declared, "The seed begins invisible, but This wasn't about the size of faith itself, Alara realized, but about its fey-nature fey. Was it living, growing, connected to the divine source? Or was it merely a static, perhaps even dead? Conviction fey, a monumental belief that lacked the essential spark of life? Her own mustard seed faith she had always viewed as a disadvantage, a weakness. But what if its very smallness was a sign of its potential, a testament to its pure, unadulterated essence, unburdened by the false grandeur of the giant? The scroll then described an ancient figure, known only as the sentinel of the seed, not a warrior, but a keeper of sacred knowledge, a silent watcher who understood the language of growth. This sentinel, it was written, would appear to those whose inner struggle mirrored the cosmic dance of seed and giant. To those on the cusp of understanding this, they would offer not solutions, but guidance, not power, but perspective. Their words were said to be like seeds themselves, planted in the fertile ground of a seeking heart, destined to sprout into transformative wisdom. The Sentinel's mission was to remind humanity that true power lay not in the visible, the loud, or the grand, but in the unseen, the quiet, the infinitesimal beginning that held infinite possibility. If you are finding these ancient whispers resonating within you, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue uncovering these profound narratives. As Alara absorbed these ancient truths, the very air around her seemed to shimmer with a new understanding. The dusty archives were no longer just a collection of forgotten texts. They were a living library, pulsating with the echoes. The Sentinel's words, though unuttered by any physical voice, began to form in her mind, a profound, almost mystical communication that transcended spoken language. It wasn't an external voice, but an inner awakening guided by the profound truths she was reading. She began to see the world differently, not as a collection of unmoving objects and insurmountable obstacles, but as a vibrant, dynamic tap. The giant, which had once felt so solid and real, now seemed to possess a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor, a faint illusion of permanence that began to unravel under the gaze of her newly enlightened perspective. The sentinel's voice within her mind, a confluence of the scroll's wisdom and her own intuition, revealed a critical distinction. The giant is often a monument to what has been. The seed is always a promise of what can be. One is history, the other is destiny. One is built, the other grows. And what is built, no matter how grand, can be broken or left to decay. But what truly grows, rooted in life itself, is an unstoppable force of nature, guided by an intelligence far greater than any builder's blueprint. Alara realized that her perception of her mustard seed faith had been fundamental. She had judged it by the world's standards of size and immediate impact, not by the divine standard of life and potential. Her faith wasn't meant to become a giant in the same way her fears were giants. Her faith was meant to grow into a sanctuary, a thriving ecosystem, an unassailable bastion of life that would naturally overshadow and dissolve the sterile artificial constructs of the true battle. The Sentinel showed her was not about faith size Fae, but faith source Fae. The giant of doubt and despair derived its power from Alara's fear, her perception of its might, her surrender to its immensity. It fed on her conviction that she was too small, too weak, too insignificant. It was a parasitic entity, its very existence dependent on the host's belief in its invincibility. But the mustard seed, her small, seemingly helpless spark of belief, derived its power from an entirely different source, from the very essence of creation, from the divine blueprint of life itself. It was self-sustaining, self-propagating, containing within itself the power to transform the barren wasteland into a vibrant forest, not by direct confrontation, but by radical, persistent. The scroll spoke of how even the most ancient and seemingly indestructible monuments eventually crumble, returning to dust, while a tiny seed, given the right conditions, can sprout through concrete, split rock, and reclaim the land. This was the true, silent, unstoppable power. Armed with this revelation, Alara felt a subtle shift within her. The oppressive weight that had burdened her for so long, it was no longer an insurmountable mountain, but a challenge that could be navigated, a landscape to be transformed. The giant's whispers no longer held the same chilling authority. They sounded more like the fading echoes of an old familiar lie. She understood now that the giant was powerful only as long as she believed in its power over her. Her mustard seed, though still small, was no longer a symbol of weakness, but a potent emblem of life, of potential, of a divine inheritance that transcended all earthly measures of strength. Her heart, which had been a desolate battlefield, now felt like fertile ground, ready to receive the truth and nurture its growth. The real test, the culmination of her journey, came unexpectedly. It wasn't the giant sensing Alara's newfound resolve, intensified its whispers. It conjured visions of past failures, magnified future anxieties, and tried to smother the nascent hope within her. It painted vivid pictures of her efforts being futile, her aspirations crumbling, her transformation being nothing more than a temporary illusion. You think a few words from an old scroll can change anything? You are still the same, weak, fragile. The world will break you, just as it always has. Your little seed is nothing against the storm I bring. Alara felt the familiar grip of despair tightening around her. The sheer weight of the giant's relentless assault threatened to crush her, to pull her back into the abyss of her old self. The fear was palpable, cold, and sharp. She stood on a precipice, the abyss yawning beneath her, tempting her to surrender, to believe the giant's ancient lies once more. Her mustard seed of faith felt minuscule, flickering precariously against the gale, force winds of the giant's psychological onslaught. This is it, she thought. This is where I break. This is where the seed is finally crushed. But then, a flicker. A memory of the scroll of the sentinel's silent wisdom. a whisper in her soul, not of strength, but of Fey-rootedness, Fey of the seed's unwavering connection to its source, no matter the storm above ground. The true power was not in fighting the storm, but in enduring, in growing, in transforming the very ground beneath it. In that moment, Alara did something profoundly radical. She knelt not in surrender, but in an act of profound, unwavering faith. She closed her eyes, and in her mind's eye she didn't just see a mustard seed, she became Fayet. She felt its tiny yet powerful potential. She imagined her roots, not just metaphorically, but truly, deeply, invisibly plunging into the divine soil of existence. She felt the life force, the divine energy. The giant roared, its voice shaking the very foundations of her perceived reality, attempting to shatter her concentration. But Alara held fast. She didn't fight the roar. She simply focused on the Fey-growth Fey within her. She allowed the mustard seed to do what it was designed to do, to grow, silently, persistently, irresistibly, and as she did, something astonishing happened. Its form, once so solid and unyielding, now seemed to ripple, like a mirage in the desert heat. Its roar, once deafening, became distant, a fading echo. Its oppressive shadow, which had enveloped her, began to recede, as if a brilliant, unseen sun had suddenly appeared. The giant was not destroyed in a blaze of glory, it simply began to fain dissolve. Fey, it withered, not under the force of a hammer, but under the relentless, vibrant pressure of life itself. Its power was predicated on her belief in its permanence, its invincibility, and as Alara shifted her belief from the giant's perceived might to the mustard seed's inherent life, the giant's source of power was severed. It was revealed to be nothing more than an elaborate illusion, a towering Fade built on the emptiness of fear and the barrenness of despair. The shocking answer was unveiled. Her faith wasn't meant to be a giant, it was meant to be a Fey-living seed, Fey. The giant was a monument to the past, a calcified accumulation of what she feared. The seed was a living, breathing promise of the future, a dynamic engine of the former was static, drawing power from her fear. The latter was dynamic, drawing power from the infinite divine source of life. The giant was the end of a path, the seed was the beginning of an endless journey, and the profound truth was this: a living seed, however small, holds infinitely more power than any dead giant, no matter how immense its stature. The giant had no roots, no life. It could only stand, imposing and intimidating, until the living, growing force of the seed overwhelmed its sterile existence. As the giant diminished, receding into the mists of what once was, Alara felt an unprecedented lightness. The burden was lifted not through a violent struggle, but through an internal act of profound, rooted trust. She opened her eyes. The world had not physically changed, yet everything was different. The gray sky above now seemed to hold the promise of dawn, a faint, tender blush on the horizon. The air, once heavy with despair, felt crisp and clean, invigorating her every breath. The path before her, once shrouded in the giant's shadow, was now bathed in a soft, ethereal light. She stood, not as a conqueror of an external foe, but as a gardener tending to the sacred, potent life. Alara's transformation wasn't a sudden, miraculous explosion of power, but a gradual, organic unfolding. She began to live her life from the perspective of the mustard seed, understanding that every small act of faith, every quiet moment of trust, every persistent effort was a root plunging deeper, a shoot reaching higher. She learned to discern the true nature of the giants. She encountered Fey, whether they were actual obstacles or merely towering illusions of her own making, fed by fear and reinforced by the world's superficial judgments. She found that many of these giants, when approached with the living, growing truth of her mustard seed faith, simply crumbled, not from external force, but from internal decay, unable to withstand the presence of pure. This is not just Alara's story, it is a profound allegory for your own life. How many giants are you facing right now? Is it the towering shadow of a chronic illness, a mountain of financial debt, the suffocating weight of a broken relationship, or the insidious, shapeless giant of anxiety and self-doubt that whispers constant lies in your ear? For too long you, like Alara, might have been measuring your spiritual strength by the world's flawed metrics. You might have dismissed your own small, quiet faith as insufficient a mere mustard seed against the perceived immensity of your problems. You might have yearned for a faith that was a giant fay, something outwardly impressive, visibly powerful, instantly transformative. But the shocking truth, the revelation that can set you free, is that your faith was never meant to be a giant. It was meant to be a mustard seed, and in that tiny, unassuming form lies a power so profound, so utterly unstoppable, that it can outlive, outgrow, and ultimately dissolve any giant that stands in your way. Consider the true nature of a seed. It is not about its initial size, but about the fade-lie-fay-fee. It holds the complete blueprint for a magnificent tree, a vast forest, an entire ecosystem. Its potential is boundless, its growth inexorable, provided it is given the proper environment, nurturing, patience, and a deep connection to its source. Your faith as a mustard seed is not just a belief, it is a living entity, imbued with divine potential. It is an active, growing. The giants in your life, on the other hand, are often stagnant, ungrowing. They are monuments of fear, constructs of negativity, built on the illusion of power. They draw their strength from your awe, your fear, your conviction that they are immovable. But they lack the vital essence, the dynamic power of life. They cannot grow, they can only stand, and eventually decay. So what does it mean? It means shifting your focus from the overwhelming size of your giants to the inherent, living potential of your faith. It means understanding that growth is a process, not an event. It means cultivating patience, consistency, and an unwavering trust in the divine blueprint embedded within your spiritual core. It means recognizing that every small act of faith, every quiet prayer, every moment of choosing hope over despair, it is in these seemingly small, consistent acts that the true, colossal power of your faith is unleashed. It is not about mustering a giant external show of force, but about nurturing the profound internal life that already exists within you. Do not despise the day of small beginnings, for in those small beginnings lies the seed of all greatness, the promise of all victory. Your giants will not be conquered by matching their size, but by bringing the living, growing, transforming power of your mustard seed faith into their midst. For when life meets stagnation, life always prevails. When growth meets decay, growth always triumphs. And when the dynamic, unstoppable force of divine potential meets the static fear-based illusion of a giant, the giant always inevitably recedes, dissolves, and eventually vanishes, leaving behind fertile ground for new growth, for a future defined not by fear, but by faith. The journey of Alara is the journey of every soul wrestling with the enormity of life's challenges. It is about remembering that the universe is designed. It is about tapping into that divine design within you, the very essence of your being that holds the power to transform the barren into the beautiful, the impossible into the inevitable. Your faith, that tiny mustard seed, is not a weakness. It is your greatest strength, your most potent weapon, and your most profound promise. Nurture it, trust it, and watch as the giants in your life begin to tremble, then shrink and finally embrace your mustard seed. Tend to it with conviction, and allow its inherent, divinely ordained power to unfold. Do not seek to build a giant, seek only to grow the living seed, for in its humble beginning lies the potential for a sprawling, majestic tree, a sanctuary where all the birds of the air, all your hopes and dreams, can come and make their home. This is the truth that will shock, that the smallest, most unassuming part of you holds the key to overcoming the greatest obstacles. It's not about how big your faith is, fey no fey, but how alive it is, how deeply rooted it is in the source of all life. And with that living connection, no giant, no matter how immense, can truly stand against you. That is all for today's video. If you like this video, please subscribe, like it, and support us. Thank you for watching.